Alright, it's on fire now. Yo, there are enemies on top of us, dude. Vehicle.
Airfield, they're in the middle of the open field, behind the gas tanks. Literally directly in front of you guys.
Arma Reforger accomplished something special in my eyes in that it's pretty convincing in its appearance and atmosphere when it comes to the environment. The forests look like actual forests. The ground has the same irregularities that real ground should have. The ambiance would convince me that I was outside if I could feel the breeze on my skin. As much as this game impresses me with its realism, it also impresses me with its challenge. Part of that challenge comes from the ultra-realistic environment, which, as long as you're not using metagaming settings, creates the cover and concealment and the light and shadow to make it so that every nook and cranny could hide an enemy just waiting to kill you. You just can't play fast and loose with your movement in this game. You need to be strategic and careful, or else be surprised by a sudden death. So the question is, how do you stay alive in this environment? It's a simple question without an easy answer, with many complicated dynamics factoring into how you live or die. Many will give up on trying to teach this soft skill and chalk it up to a game sense that is built with experience. But in my opinion, this is a question that has already been answered. Militaries train their members every day on how to best move about the battlefield to maximize their chances of survival. So today, we're going to talk about individual considerations for battlefield survivability, in particular, how to change your movement based on the terrain, how to maximize your situational awareness against enemies that are determined to hide, and how to combine these two components into cohesive survival habits. Hey, GG's, bro.
GG, man.
Well played. When it comes down to individual movement on the battlefield, the image that immediately conjures up for a lot of people is that of individual movement techniques, or IMTs. So these include various different types of crawls, such as the high and low crawl, as well as the rush, which is when you dash from cover to cover in short 3 to 5 second sprints to minimize your exposure to enemy fire, famously associated with the phrase, "I'm up, he sees me, I'm down." IMTs are important for safely moving about the battlefield, but some context should be remembered for their application in Arma. First, they're meant to be used during a firefight when contact with the enemy has already been made, specifically when you as an individual are part of the assault. IMTs are less useful for regular movement when enemy contact has yet to happen and could happen at any moment. Second, IMTs are meant to be executed with plenty of supporting fire from friendly troops to help cover you. So this is just your individual component of an entire unit's effort to advance on an objective. IMTs are not really a complete guide for what the individual should be doing to try and maximize their chances of survival on the battlefield. For that, you need something that will help you to move about safely and avoid being spotted and engaged first, and instead be the one to spot and shoot the enemy first. To accomplish such, I think best practice comes down to 3 broader skills. So let's talk about terrain-based movement first.
We're here, guys.
Nice landing. The most fundamental thing to consider for staying alive on the battlefield is how your movement changes with the terrain. Most players in Arma have a tendency to walk in straight lines because human nature is to always take the path of least resistance. But walking in a straight line is how you find yourself in a sudden gunfight without any cover nearby. So instead of always taking the path of least resistance, as your natural human tendencies will make you, you can improve your survivability by following these 4 basic principles. Let's dive into an example to cover them in depth. Alright guys, today we're going to talk about 4 principles for utilizing the terrain when conducting a movement. And the reason I want to talk about this is because there's so many times where I see a dude decide, hey, I want to get to X location on the map. I'm going to find the compass bearing to get there, and then I'm just going to hold down Shift W to get there as fast as possible. And this can be good, especially when you're in a safe location, to just maximize your movement speed and not waste any time. However, the closer you get to an objective, the more likely you are to run into enemies, and the less you want to be doing this. Instead, what you want to be doing is utilizing cover and concealment so that you are best advantaged if you are to come across an enemy. And we're going to talk about how to use the terrain on two different levels, on the macro level and the micro level. So first, on the macro level, rule number 1, avoid open danger areas, or ODAs, and use covered and concealed locations for your movement routes. So an ODA is just any area that's devoid of cover and concealment, 360 degrees, like this open field that I am standing in the middle of. So generally speaking, if you do come across an ODA, you never want to go through that open field. You want to try and find an alternative route that goes around it. And generally speaking, stick to the tree lines, stick to the cover, stick to the concealment. So that's the macro level of using terrain. Now on a micro level, even when you are conducting your movement along a good location, a good route, such as through this forest here, instead of walking in a straight line, kind of mindlessly blowing through to where you need to go, you want to be paying attention to the rocks, the trees that are around you, and ensuring that you're sticking close to these potential pieces of cover. Bookmark the trees, bookmark the rocks around you, and just make small adjustments to your movement path so that if you were to take sudden contact, you would immediately have that cover on hand to take cover and then engage in that firefight instead of just getting popped right off the bat. Now, the second thing you want to be doing is maintaining dispersion from your friendlies. I see a lot of times when people are moving, especially because people want to follow their buddies and stick close to them, not get lost, they end up hugging friendly players a little too much, like Thomas Anderson here. Now, I know that it feels good and nice and cozy to stand next to them, but you don't want to be doing this because this is a great way for, if you were to take contact from the enemy, a single grenade or a single machine gun burst or even a single rifleman to be able to take both of you guys out in quick succession. Instead, you need to ensure that you are maintaining a good spread away from everybody else. The fatality radius of a grenade in this game is 5 meters. A casualty radius of a grenade is 15 meters. So you want to be maintaining, ideally 15 meters, at least 5 meters spacing between individuals. And this remains in play when you're conducting your movement and making use of this cover that I talked about, where you're making adjustments to your path to bounce from cover to cover. You don't want to end up doing this thing where, oh, you're trying to find cover and you drift inwards and end up clustering up with the friendly. Instead, it's important to remain mindful of your path of movement relative to your friendly's path of movement, and be sure not to crowd out your friendly from any potential pieces of cover that they might want to use and occupy the same piece of cover. Instead, you always want to be adjusting your movement path so that you are maintaining that spacing even as you are bouncing from cover to cover. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is adjusting your movement speed. So ideally, when you are conducting extended movements, you want to adjust your movement so that you aren't burning stamina, you maintain high stamina. And this is so that you then have that stamina available to burn when you really need to use it in a tactical situation. However, you do want to increase your movement speed when you come across areas like this. It's a gap, a little bit open, and there's not a lot of cover and concealment available. So what you want to do is, you may have been moving slow up until this point, but to cross this gap, you want to maximize your movement speed in order to minimize your exposure while you are crossing this gap. Speed is security in this case. And then once you've crossed to the other side, you want to slow your movement speed back down so that you are maintaining your stamina. Now, after crossing a gap like that, what you can also do is come to a complete stop in a covered and concealed location to do what's called a SILS, or an SLLS, which stands for Stop, Look, Listen, Smell. And this is just where you go completely still to hone in on your senses to detect any enemies that may be nearby. Now, obviously, because this is a video game, you don't have any sense of smell to be able to detect burning fuel or what have you, but you definitely still have your vision. And in video game land, your sense of hearing is very important. Arma Reforger is unique because you can actually hear the sound of branches cracking underneath players' feet. You will also notice that birds will fly out from the environment when they get startled by players. And in this game, bushes tend to rustle very loudly as well. So these are all very environmental aspects that you need to pay attention to that will help you maintain situational awareness. Now, adjusting your movement on the terrain, as we've been talking about, is important for staying alive. But before we move on, let's also talk about 3 specific types of terrain that deserve special mention. First are defilades. Generally speaking, you want to move along routes that provide you with cover and concealment, and one of the best sources of that are routes that are along defilade, also known as dead ground. So to be in a defilade is to be in an area that cannot be directly seen or shot at by the enemy, such as inside of a ditch, behind a wall, or underneath a ridgeline. As a general rule, you should always keep an eye out for and use routes that are in defilade when you're maneuvering on an enemy in a firefight. Second, let's talk about ridgelines. Most people intuitively understand that the high ground offers many advantages. Chief among them are better sightlines to observe your surroundings and spot the enemy. A big mistake to make, however, is skylining. Skylining is when you're positioned at the top of a ridgeline such that you silhouette yourself against the sky, which allows nearby enemies to more easily spot you. This is obviously very bad, and doing so has the effect of exposing you to all the threats around you rather than enabling you to spot them better as you might have originally intended. So when you're moving along the high ground, it's better to not use the ridgeline and instead use the military crest. The military crest is that area below the normal ridgeline along the slope. You want to be high enough that you still have the benefit of the high ground, but low enough that no part of you is breaking the skyline. So an easy litmus test for this is to see if you can see over the top of the hill. That means you're too high. Using the military crest just helps you not stand out like a sore thumb while still having the benefits of height. At nighttime, the way you use the military crest does change. You want to be lower on the slope so that if by chance any enemies are higher up on the hill, you'll be able to spot them against the night sky while you remain shrouded in darkness in the low ground. And third, let's talk about roads. It's easy to underestimate the danger that these pose because they're relatively thin. Roads are what are called linear danger areas, or LDAs. They're like the open danger areas posed by fields, but the threat is less obvious because instead of being exposed in 360 degrees, you're exposed only to your flanks. But even that is significant. Let's take a moment to look down the length of the road. Everything you can see down this length is a potential location from which an undetected enemy can spot and shoot you as you enter the open. So remember to treat LDAs with a little bit of extra caution as a good habit. When you have to cross them, generally you want to avoid doing so at sections of the road on top of the hill because you'll get skylined, or where there are intersections because those tend to have heavy traffic. Instead, try to cross as often as possible near bends in the road. In the middle of an S-bend is ideal to limit the danger area you're exposed to, or you want to cross at a low point between 2 hills. Otherwise, just cross where there is maximum cover and concealment on both the near and far side of the road.
Yeah, we probably should, just because oh shit, there's a branch. Fuck!
Okay, now thus far in this video, I've been focusing on how to maximize your cover and concealment to avoid being detected by the enemy. Now, a natural way to continue applying this principle is by keeping your stance as low as possible at all times, and this in turn makes it tempting to stay prone all the time and just crawl around. But there is another factor at play that you should consider that makes this a bad idea, which is maintaining your situational awareness. Situational awareness is just as, if not more important to your survivability as staying stealthy, so when managing your stance, you should always consider the trade-offs to your sightlines. So for example, going prone may maximize your cover and concealment in a specific location, but if it means that all you can see is the grass in front of your face, it's a poor trade-off. Instead, you might consider just kneeling to provide better sightlines while also lowering your profile. A kneeling player who can see their surroundings is better off than a prone player that is blinded by surrounding foliage. Now, managing this whole concealment versus situational awareness trade-off is the key skill component to good movement technique, not just for personal stances, but also for choosing your route. such as when you're choosing between a path in Defilade versus a path along a military crest. The correct answer depends on the situation, what your priorities are, as well as your judgment. So now that we're talking about the importance of situational awareness, let's expand upon it a little bit as a key component of staying alive on the battlefield. Generally speaking, you want to always be scanning your surroundings, but situational awareness has more to it than simply keeping your head on a swivel. When many players scan their surroundings for enemies, I think they develop an unconscious expectation to see silhouettes of enemy figures out on the distance, which they can then engage. This will happen, especially in Arma, but the reality is that the most dangerous enemy players in the field are those who maximize their own cover and concealment, just as we've been talking about doing for ourselves in this video. And the best way to spot these enemies isn't through sweeping scans of your surroundings, but by knowing exactly which parts of your environment to focus your attention on, and then scrutinizing those areas for inconsistencies in color, movement, shadow, or outline, rather than complete enemy figures. Okay, so what parts of your environment are those that you should be focusing your attention on? Well, this question is best answered by first laying out where you shouldn't look and then working our way backwards from there. So what areas are a comparatively lower priority for you to focus on? First on this list are open areas. You don't need to scrutinize open fields, as enemies are unlikely to expose themselves out there to begin with, and if they do, you'll be able to easily spot them. Similarly, you don't need to worry as much about isolated pieces of cover, such as a large boulder out in the middle of a field. Sure, enemies might be hiding there, but if the location can't be accessed without first crossing an exposed area, it's less likely to be a threat. Next on the threat tier list are those areas with a lot of foliage that provide concealment, but not cover. And these are reasonably high threat areas that enemies will often lurk in, so you should devote some time to watching them. But they also tend to cover the majority of your surroundings, and they're not the top tier threat areas. The most important threat areas that you should devote your attention to are those that offer both cover and concealment amongst the terrain to potential enemies. So large rocks and trees tucked in amongst the foliage, armored vehicles, any walls, and buildings with dark windows and doorways. These are the locations where the best players will gravitate towards and use against you. They are also the most challenging type of location to fight an enemy in. So as you scan your surroundings, you want to prioritize focusing your scrutiny on these top tier threat areas first. Use that Arma zoom in feature, and you want to focus on perceiving inconsistencies of color, movement, shadow, or outline rather than trying to spot complete enemy figures. Now, I know this doesn't come naturally to most people, but like all things, it'll come with practice.
Are you up or are you dead?
He's dead there, bro. He's dead there, bro. And so are you, bitch.
Okay.
Once you've got your basic movement habits down and have also built up the right skills to maintain situational awareness, you now have the components necessary to stay alive on the battlefield. But staying alive doesn't come naturally even with these two ingredients. You need to learn to integrate them into cohesive habits for anticipating and reacting to enemy contact. So how do you put all this together into cohesive survival habits? Well, it's all of the same stuff, just working all at the same time. And it can be difficult, but hear me out. So as I'm moving through this forest here, I'm making use of cover and concealment, bouncing from cover to cover, from that tree to these rocks. These rocks may seem small, but notice how much cover that provides when I go prone. Infantry is unique in that they're able to make use of micro terrain. And I'm also watching my surroundings. There's an open field to my right. I don't need to scrutinize that area as much. I just need to sweep it every now and then. Up ahead is a lot of concealment, so I may need to be wary there. And off to my right, though, there's hard cover and concealment, which an enemy could be occupying. And that is my top threat area as of now. So in order to adapt to that, I just want to shift my route to go a little bit more to the right and put a little bit more cover and concealment between me and that threat area. So I have a slight defilade here now, which if I were to take shots from there, I could take cover behind. And this bush just helps provide some concealment as well. And now that that threat area is something I'm aware of, if an enemy were to engage me from that position, I won't be as surprised. I'll be able to react much better. I'm just going to continue my movement, doing the same thing here. I have good cover and concealment on my right flank. I can focus my attention to just watching my left flank and up ahead. And I'm going to favor crossing on the right side of trees again, because I'm vulnerable to my left. And crossing on that right side of a tree just enables me to more quickly take cover, as opposed to crossing on the left side, which would leave me exposed and require me to run around to the other side in order to take cover. Now, one final piece of advice I want to leave you guys with. Say that I do this whole leveraging, cover, and concealment super well, such that I actually take soft contact rather than hard contact. Hard contact is where the enemy spots me first and starts shooting at me. Soft contact is where I've spotted the enemy, I've made visual or audio contact, but we are not yet in a firefight. In this situation, I need to stay unspotted, because even if I'm unspotted now, if I go and get myself spotted, I've given up that advantage I have. And in order to do so, I should always restrict my movement to be directly towards or away from the threat, and keep my lateral movement to a minimum. This is because lateral movement is way easier to spot, and our brains are just naturally drawn to it. So when you know where your enemy is, what you want to do is keep your lateral movement to a minimum and either move directly towards the enemy if you need to close the distance for whatever you want to do, or move away from the enemy if you need to break contact. And once you've broken contact, you can move to a different position that is more advantageous. Alright guys, so that was the Milsimmer's Guide to Staying Alive on the Battlefield. It is a cocktail of skills that encompasses movement based on the terrain, situational awareness, all combined to create cohesive survival habits. So again, these are just fundamentals that in my opinion reflect a long established body of knowledge that I thought might be useful for you in Arma Reforger, or would at least make an entertaining watch given that this is the definitive Milsim game. So let me know if you guys found this video enjoyable or insightful. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.